Climate First Bank is the world's first FDIC-insured community bank founded to combat the climate crisis. Climate First offers a complete full-service portfolio of easy-to-use traditional banking products designed to do good for people and the planet. So thank you, Climate First. And joining us today is Mr. Jeff Coward, Executive VP, and some of his cohorts are over there against the wall, so you can also check with them, and they'll be able to tell you more. Oh, you're there. Thank you. At this point, I'd like to invite any office holders or candidates to come up to the side mic over there and introduce themselves. Audience, I know these folks to a league audience are our rock stars for their public service, but in the interest of time and moving to our highly anticipated program, please hold your applause until the end. I'm thinking we may not have too many because sadly they're doing a service for the mayor's father today, so they may all be otherwise engaged. So no? All right. So next, I would like to recognize a guest. Oh, we have one. I'm sorry. Please.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm Marty Sullivan, Commissioner for the City of Winter Park. And now I'm going to take off my my Commissioner hat, put on my league hat, encourage you to sign the petition over against the wall for a petition for clean and healthy water in Florida. Thank you.
Sorry, Barbara, I was looking at my salad. Andrew Bain, Orange County Judge, and I see all my FAMU professors, alumni. Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Hi.
Hello. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judge Charlica Nunez Navarro, and it's a pleasure to serve you. I sit on the criminal bench here in Orange and Osceola County. Please, if you haven't met me, feel free to come up and we'll have a conversation. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you. We all recognize you from your stint as our moderator for the Judicial Candidate Forums, and we so appreciate it. Okay, we have another person that I'd like to recognize today. We have Jasmine Burney Clark here. Very honored to have her. She is the founder and consulting director of Equal Ground. Please, Jasmine, would you stand up so we can recognize you? Thank you. Equal Ground is one of our great allies in the fight for equal voting rights. We've worked together at many events across the state, and their work is truly a model of community-centered activism, so thank you. I have one other recognition who you will see at the end. I'm also excited today to have with us my co-presenter, Tiffany Hughes. Many of you know Tiffany as president of the Orange County NAACP, former president, and also as a recent candidate for office. I will say Tallahassee's loss is our gain, and we are so lucky to have her knowledge and passion as a league member. I will make a confession to you. I know we're not supposed to have favorites among our children, but the February Hot Topics has always been one of my favorite Hot Topics programs because I have always learned so much. Even better is its draw of a more diverse crowd than any other subject during the year, which is such a great sight in our community. But I do have to say that when Saudi Ellis introduced Sue and I to ASAHL back in our Hot Topics days, my appreciation moved even higher as their knowledge and scholarship has brought such a wonderful dimension to the program. The annual Black History month theme set forth by the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, also known as ASAHL, is Black Resistance. Founded in 1915 by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, ASAHL has brought together scholars, students, and all who are interested in the collection, research, and dissemination of the African American story. Today, the League of Women Voters Orange County DEIA Committee is pleased to partner with ASAHL Central Florida Dorothy Turner Johnson branch to present today's Hot Topic program. Branch President Manuel Jones, please stand and be recognized as well. Thank you. He has been such a wonderful partner for us to work with in getting this launched, so thank you. Our moderator today is Valeda Flewellen. She is a life member of ASAHL and charter member / historian of the Dorothy Turner Johnson branch. Valeda is a graduate of Marymount College in Tarrytown, New York, an author of 7 books, a poet, storyteller, activist, and a member of Bridging the Color Divide, and founding member of the Alliance for Truth and Justice. Valeda Flewellen, the program is yours.
Thank you very much. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven rings to the harmony of liberty. Our vote is our voice. As the Association for the Study of African American History and the League of Women Voters are committed to the idea that every voice matters. When the Association of the Study of Life and History meets, we sing, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Founded by Florida poet and songwriters Rosamond and John Johnson. And that voice, that song, reminds us that the issue of race is central to the American story. It is a truth that we must face and address. The Black voice has been muffled. An inclusive American story ensures that we all can lift our voice, cast our vote, based on the ideals on which our democracy was founded. All are created equal. Liberty and justice for all. Today, our distinguished presenters will explore 3 specific areas where Blacks have resisted the muffling of our voices. And they will discuss how we have responded to the trauma that resulted from the egregious acts designed to separate us from the ballot box and deny the Black voice the harmony of liberty. Truth has power. Thank you for your interest in joining us in seeking the power of our collective story. Today, let us explore Black resistance. For the first part, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists, Patricia Bouchard, to speak about the history of Black women's resistance. Professor Patricia Bouchard teaches constitutional law, First Amendment, advance appellate advocacy, and advance topics on women and the law at Florida A&M College School of Law. Professor Burchard began her legal career clerking for the Honorable George W. Mitchell of the District of Columbia Superior Court. She writes in the area of human rights with a specialty focused on female issues. Professor Burchard received the Warren Rosemarin Award for outstanding teaching and service. She's a 4-time recipient of the Percy Looney Spirit of Service Award and a 6-time recipient of Professor of the Year. She regularly coaches moot court and client counseling teams and serves as a commissioner for the City of Orlando's Mayor's Martin Luther King Commission. Professor Burchard has a BS degree from Northwestern University and a Juris Doctorate, cum laude, from Howard University. I welcome to the stage Professor Patricia Burchard.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Thank you. So I too want to thank the League of Women Voters. I want to also acknowledge Carter G. Woodson, who established not only ASAHL, but who started Black History Month, starting in February of 1976. And it was in February because that was the birth month for Abraham Lincoln and for Frederick Douglass. And so that's why he put it there. So I also want to acknowledge and thank my friends and my colleagues who are members of the Dorothy Turner Johnson branch of ASAHL. And I also want to thank you. I want to thank the audience because it takes courage to be woke. And just remember that that moniker should not bear any stigma, because the opposite of woke is asleep. And it is a waste of your intellect and your purpose in life to exist in a perpetual state of sleep. What a joy to be woke. I hope that you are all receptive to our message, because history should not shame us, but rather it should propel us forward towards our unending search for a more perfect union. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I'm going to read a lot of my comments because it was easier for me to write them down because time is of the essence, and I have a tendency to wander off the topic. So I wanted to write, so I apologize in advance. And I also want to say that my area of scholarship is on women, and it is also on voting. So that's why I chose as my topic for resistance is Black women. Alice Walker, in her 1993 novel, Possessing the Secret of Joy, reveals to the reader at the end of the novel that resistance is the secret of joy. Slavery was a bitter but legal institution. And any small act in response to brutality can and should be viewed through the lens of resistance. Likewise, in post-slavery, America has not been a crystal staircase for Black women. And although some of the incidences of resistance described below may seem inconsequential, by those small acts being acknowledged and being offered into evidence at this point, we have to say that Black women are unbowed, unbroken, but ultimately still unrecognized. Deborah Gray White says in her book about enslaved Black women, they were the only women in America who were sexually exploited with impunity, stripped and whipped with a lash, and worked like oxen. Ain't I a woman? Black women have been rising to the occasion and displaying courage, determination, and persistence long before the hyphenated American was added as a descriptor of who and what they were. Capture and slavery are certainly not the starting points to the story of the glories of Black women, but they are clearly the point of entry for this conversation. So, resistance. Let's talk about resistance with respect to rebellions and revolts. An examination of history from capture to servitude reveals the relevant placement of men and women in the enslavement scheme. Generally, captured men were chained and held in the cargo hold of the ship below, while women and children were unchained and held on upper decks. The separation of men and women was done in part to prevent them from plotting together to revolt. The captors did not realize that most would rather die than submit to slavery. Women, unable to communicate with the men below, used their skills and grit to upend the situation whenever the opportunity presented itself. Early resistance had a name, and it was woman. Quite often, the success of a revolt was tied to one or more of the enslaved persons who were held on the upper deck. Most commonly, this agent was a woman or a child, because women and children were generally granted more mobility on deck and around the ship than men were. By successfully using the very organization and routine of the traders and the captors against them. The failure to chain women and keep them below deck could partially be explained by the persistent refusal of the European slave traders to take the threat of women seriously. To this day, we are not taken seriously. However, there was another reason why women were kept on deck unchained. The crew above slave ships wanted to maintain access to the women, to use them as they would. History demonstrates that resistance to bondage has been consistent, deliberate, and ongoing, and that Black women have played a major role in seeking freedom. The fact that women played a central role in certain slave ship revolts cannot be disputed. Owners of slaves almost always sought to convey the impression that their human chattel was docile, tractable, and happy. But this was a ploy slaves used to mislead their owners. Just as it was the case aboard slave ships, there was a conscious placement of men and women on the plantations. The enslaved women were given jobs that required them to remain on the plantation with little reason to leave and traverse the countryside, whereas men had jobs that many times required them to leave the plantation and perform tasks on neighboring sites. This positioning provided opportunities of resistance for Black women, which were apparently unobvious to their owners. The intimacy was established by having enslaved Black women nurture children who were not their own, cook food that they could never eat, and clean houses that they would never own. However, this intimacy did not block out the consciousness of oppression and the visceral rejection of slavery, which made resistance to slavery a 24-hour task. This is not to imply in any way that enslaved Black men were free to roam the countryside. All enslaved people were prohibited from leaving the plantation at night. There are long gaps between documented revolts and rebellions, and because there is no documentation of lesser revolts, one could erroneously conclude that there was no resistance to slavery in the years not mentioned, and when there were revolts or rebellions, Black women played no role in them. This is false. fleeing, known as running away, as resistance. It is important to reiterate the contrary to popular folklore. Enslaved people were not content, docile creatures, easy and happy to do the bidding of the slave owner. In fact, resistance was constant and much more than single acts of sabotage. Resistance was a movement led in large part by Black women. History speaks of Denmark VC, Nat Turner, and other men who led revolts. However, little attention is given to women who quietly and consciously work towards freedom for generations. A major component of resistance was consciousness, the guttural knowledge that a system which had been born and bred, in which they had been born and bred, was inherently unjust, immoral, and ultimately unsustainable. The practice of prohibiting literacy in slaves did not quell their desire to be free, nor did it staunch the resistance by women who were at the epicenter of the household and who displayed small acts of courage. This is one of my favorite stories. This is a story from the Federal Workers Project that President Roosevelt started, and this is a description. Was a gal for Mrs. Used to have to stand behind her at the table and reach her the salt and syrup and anything else she called for. Old Massa would spell out words real fast, anything that he didn't want me to know about. One day Massa was fit to be tied. He was in such a bad mood, was raving about taxes and them trifling niggas he got to feed. Gonna sell them all, I swear for Christ, I'm gonna sell them, he said. Then old Mrs. asked, which ones he gonna sell? And he tell them real quick, and he spell it out. He spell out G-A-B-E and R-A-U-F-U-S. Of course, I stood there without batting an eye and making believe I didn't hear him, but I was packing them letters in my head all the time. And as soon as I finished the dishes, I rushed down to my father, and I say to him, just like Martha say, I say, G-A-B-E-R-U-F-U-S. He said, Gabe and Rufus. He told me to go back to the house and act like I ain't been out. The next day, Gabe and Rufus was gone. They had run away. Massa nearly died, got to cussing and raving so that he took sick. Mrs. went to town and told the sheriff, but they never could find them two slaves. Black bodies were the human cash crop of slavery, and Black women were at the epicenter of that order. Resistance came with a very heavy price for them by the traditional gender roles, which gave them a deeper connection to the community and made it harder for them to leave. Resistance was a way of life for many, and it showed its face in many ways. The horrors of slavery cultivated Black women's strength, resilience, and determination. Every Southern community raised its annual crop of runaway slaves, and women who ran away and were caught were no less ruthlessly punished than slave men. It would be in many cases that they suffered penalties that were excessive. When men were hanged, the women were burned alive. Although women had difficulty running away during slavery, many still tried. Many of these runaways did not make it to the everlasting freedom, but that did not stop them from resistance. Another story. Here is an advertisement from a Virginia newspaper from October the 20th, 1786. Easter, a bright mulatto wench named Judd, about 30 years old, is very remarkable. She's lost one eye, but which I have forgot, has long black hair, a large scar on her elbows, and several other scars in her face, and has been subject to running away since she was 10 years old. I have great reason to think that she may try to pass for a free woman and endeavor to make it to South Carolina. She is very knowing about house business, can spin, can weave, sew, and iron. She had on, when she went away, her winter clothing, but she also had a blue and white striped Virginia cloth gown, just to mention a few. Whoever conveys this slave to me shall be rewarded for their trouble. And then a girl after my own heart. Mary Clay, runaway slave, had on a white linsey dress and took with her a red changeable silk. Now, who do you think that belonged to? And a black dress. Also a white robe, striped gingham dress, and several other things. Sarah is the biggest devil that ever lived. She poisoned the stud horse and set a stable on fire. She also burnt General Williams' stable and stackyard with 7 horses on the property to the value of $1,500. She was handcuffed but got away at Ruddle's Mills on her way down to the river, which is the 5th time she escaped when she tried to get out into the country. I will give the above reward for said Negro, if taken out of state, $25. If taken in state, I will give even more. Often fleeing enslaved women took risks knowing they would never see their loved ones again. Even if an attempt at freedom failed, it disrupted the narrative of the dumb black woman who was simultaneously a mammy and a Jezebel, who contributed little or nothing to society and was content to be enslaved. For white men whose honor and manhood ultimately depended on their ability to control their women and their slaves, Mammy's leaving was just as surely as emasculating as a defeat on the battlefield. For white men and women who never questioned their black maid's devotion, they even thought she loved them, Mammy's departure was felt as deeply as a mother's abandonment or rejection. Another thing, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to quickly sum up. Another thing, extraordinary acts of resistance. Truancy, self-mutilation, abortion, birth controls were options when outright revolt didn't happen. John Hope Franklin wrote, "Self-mutilation and suicide were popular forms of resistance to slavery." He added, when his slave woman was found dead by her own hanging in 1829, a Georgia planter was amazed. But why would she want to take her own life? Likewise, pregnancies were extremely difficult when they were the result of a slave marriage. But pregnancies that resulted from sexual enslavement and rape were even more harrowing. I'm going to cut it short because I don't want to intrude upon my colleagues' time, but I just want to also add that killing was also an act of resistance. I just wanted to get this in. Because many of the enslaved black women who worked in the home were cooks. And they had special recipe ingredients such as arsenic and ground glass, but that's another chapter in the book. Also, the resistance of freed black women who came forward to help those who were still enslaved. But I just want to add this before I stop. The ultimate act of resistance is survival. So even with the historical evidence of the role that black women played in both resisting slavery and aiming for freedom, it is survival. It is survival. Because they survived and resisted, I sit here before you today. Resistance is the secret of joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bouchard. Thank you. Wonderful. Hearing Professor Bouchard, I could not help but think about a play for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, Ntozake Shange. And there's a line in that play that I kept in my head as I heard you. It was, somebody, anybody, sing a black girl's song. Sing a black girl's song. We've suffered for so long. Somebody sing a black girl's song. And there are many black girls who have resisted right here in Central Florida. We have NY Theory, PEC, who started PEC. Senator Thompson, who founded PASS, Mary McLeod Bethune, Regina Hill, Tiffany Hughes, Reverend Erica Rembrandt Smith, Carolyn Fennell, Anita Wilson, Saudie Ellis, Lee Rambo. Sing a black girl song, will you? Sing a black girl song. And I invite you, there are so many more names. I could stand here and I would be taking up time from my presenters, but there's so many more names of black women who have resisted right here in Central Florida. And so I, along with ASAHL and the League of Black Women, invite you to go to our Facebook page. Call out their names. It's time we call their names. Sing a black girl song, will ya? Must add, not all black resistors are black. You know? We have Joy Dickerson, who writes the black girl song. We have Christian Cognizant, who started the Alliance for Truth and Justice, singing a black girl song. Betsy Swartz, Bridging the Color Divide, and the League of Women Voters, singing a black girl song. Let our voices not be muffled. We have stories to tell. Now, our next distinguished panelist will speak about the role of the arts in black resistance. Professor Don Harrell is an adjunct professor of Africana Studies at the University of Central Florida and president of African Diasporic Arts and Education, Inc. Professor Harrell is a member of Alternative Roots, the Intercultural Leadership Institute Fellow, and the Dorothy Turner Johnson branch of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. His professional career also includes being an award-winning producer and director. Professor Harrell is a graduate of Union College, Schenectady, New York, where he was awarded the Unitas Diversity and Community Award. Additionally, he has an MA in African American Studies from UCLA. I welcome to the stage Professor Don Harrell. For you.
I didn't need it. But my academic focus is African ethnomusicologists. And ethnomusicology is a cross between musicology and cultural anthropology. So I look at and relate to the world through the lens of one who sees the world as an ethnomusicologist. I'm also a performing artist. My instrument of choice is the traditional African drum and the rhythms that support and surround it. I'm also out of need to share the story of Africans and African Americans considered to be a storyteller. So I'm going to combine both of my personal focus in this particular presentation. I hope you enjoy it. The heritage of Black Americans is at odds with the erroneous perception of enslavers and exploiters of Black bodies, who by and large denied and still deny their humanity. Heritage. is a measure of self that has been passed down from generation to generation, that dictates how one looks at and relates to the world. The heritage of Black Americans is heavily reliant on cultural memory, the link between the past, present, and future that is embodied in text, rites, monuments, celebrations, objects, sacred scriptures, music, and other voices from the past, and the heritage of African Americans gives rise to the spirit of resistance. Whether called colored, Negro, Black, African American, or other less endearing terms, Blacks in America have not by and large been entitled to the full measure of rights and privileges granted to others. We celebrate this heritage, nevertheless, because of those who came before us, a strong and majestic people who created themselves as a distinct culture during their 400 plus years of existence here in this space and time. Albeit within the context of the perennial struggle for survival, liberation, and civil rights. European trafficking of Black bodies that followed their exploration into the African continent and their development of wealth-producing monocrops during their colonial expansion into the Caribbean and North, South, and Central America is how we came to be. We are the result of the amalgamation of members of numerous sub-Saharan ethnic groups who survived the slave ships and their descendants. We celebrate the resistance that is central to this heritage. Awaiting those who survived the Middle Passage was a heinous system of commerce in which a chattel, an enslaved person, was owned in perpetuity, as were their children and their children's children. This dehumanization, supported by governments, monarchs, and religious leaders, was but one of the many obstacles that Blacks would have to overcome in the years that laid ahead. And their cultural memory would have to be strategically employed in order to do so. Fortunately, resilient African memories of the do's and don'ts of life, femininity, masculinity, aesthetics, worship, and spirituality were not disintegrated by the condition in which they found themselves, and race and class structure only constrained what they could do with those memories. One of the first tasks at hand was how to unify around common goals and build homogeneous community. And cultural memory would prove to be a potent means by which to do so. Accordingly, a popular music and dance practice with origins in Central and West Africa called the ring shout became a vehicle through which the separate people would come to recognize shared values and thus begin the process of making one out of many. During the ring shouts, dancers moved counterclockwise while keeping percussive rhythm with hands and feet, with gleeful onlookers adding to the festivities. Ring shouts sprung up all over the colonial colonies, most notably in New Orleans, Congo Square, and in the Pinkster celebrations of Albany, New York. And they remained a part of the African American culture milieu even now. This use of African performing arts by way of dance, drum, and song in the context of the ring in time converged into the creation of the old Negro spirituals and the other music genres that followed, like blues, ragtime, jazz, gospel, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, and rap and hip hop. The Negro spirituals were the religious music of African Americans during slavery. It was based off of metrical compositions typically composed of rhythm couplets and loosely based on biblical scriptures. They emerged after the first Great Awakening of the 1740s. The Great Awakening was a period of religious revivalism that swept through the colonies. Christianity during this period was fervently forced upon the slaves by their masters, who at the same time were stripping them from their ancestral lands, languages, families, and cultures. Although everything was taken away from the enslaved to break them down and force assimilation, the soul of their music could not be stifled. There were several laws created to ensure control over the enslaved, including laws that prohibited their assembly without the supervision of white masters. They resisted these laws with clandestine gatherings in living quarters and in remote field gullies. The Negro spirituals were used to express their forced faith in their own way in these gatherings, carving out their own identity despite the tragedy of their circumstances. These songs also serve to communicate double entendres, song texts with double meaning. The usefulness in plantation life of these songs cannot be understated as plans to escape bondage and seek freedom and to follow the Underground Railroad were communicated via these lyrics. The legacy of Negro spirituals still survives today in the call and response style music and orations that is part of the performance practice of the Black church, and all the musics of Black Americans and their attendant cultures. After a bloody Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln, as you well know, issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This occurred on January 1st, 1863, declaring that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are henceforth free. Now, the backlash of white supremacy that followed resulted in terrorism and eventually Jim Crow segregation and the Great Migration north and west. It also resulted in the flowering of the Harlem Renaissance, which was an explosion of literary and artistic expression that built upon the agency of the spirituals, in my view, and reverberates as Black resistance even now. One of the most difficult things I get to do, or I find I have to do as a professor of Africana Studies who focuses on music culture, is to get students to fully understand that there's nothing really new under the sun. It all started somewhere, and if mama taught child, then what that child knows is what mama knew. And so when we go through the litany of different genres over time, it is very difficult for my students to understand that all is one. All is one. So you can go directly from the Negro spirituals and work your way all the way up to rap and hip-hop culture, and the double entendre and the resistance that was part and parcel of those music carries through to today. The importance of this resistance is captured in a story that I'd like to share in closing.
If it's quick?
It is very quick.
Okay. Okay.
It's a good thing she doesn't have one of those little things in it.
Don't tease us.
Time was, and fire, water, good and bad lived together. One day they went hunting and they found many cattle, which they decided to share equally. But Bad wanted more for himself. So he went secretly to Water. And he said, Water, you have the power to destroy fire. Do this, and we can have his share. Water believed this, and he went and threw himself on fire, and fire was, of course, no more. Then Bad went over to Good, and he said, fire has been destroyed. It was Water who did it, so he doesn't deserve to share with us. Let's take the cattle up into the mountains and divide them equally. And so Good and Bad drove the cattle into the mountain. Water saw them go and tried to follow, but Water found that he couldn't run uphill, only down. And so they escaped. And then at a resting place, Bad turned to Good and said, foolish one, I am strong and you are weak. I am master and you are my servant. So all of the cattle shall belong to me. And Good said, I'm not your servant, and it is I who is strong. And Good went forth and he struggled with Bad. Now they fought up and down the mountain without either destroying the other. So they went before the wind and asked the wind to judge who was right. The wind listened and said, it's like this. Good is destined to struggle with Bad. Good will win, but Bad will return. And again, Good must fight for all time to come, for time immemorial. Good must fight Bad, because if he doesn't, he'll be lost forever. Thank you, good people.
Oh, we wouldn't have wanted to miss that story. I tell you, that was good. That was good. Well, we have an empty chair. Our third panelist, unfortunately, will not be able to join us today for personal reasons. So we have an empty chair. Our third panel was Dr. Carmen Legthias, an anthropologist and registered professional archaeologist, co-director of the Archaeological Project of Southwest Puerto Rico. We regret that she will not be with us today, and we wish her the very best. I have just a brief statement in regard to her topic. Her topic was voting as resistance. And in his book, Voting, the Ultimate Act of Resistance, author Richard C. Bell states that we must never forget to go beyond the history written by those in power at the time, and always remember to look at history from the perspective of the oppressed, who did not get the opportunity to write the first version of history. Voting is precious, fundamental, and always worth fighting for at all cost. Bell reminds us that all policy, power, and societal change derives from ordinary citizens moving elected officials to enact laws to reflect the will of the people at any given moment in history. When any citizen is denied the right to vote due to illegal, immoral, or unethical barriers, the will of the people becomes the will of some people, not of all people, which is what happened in Florida in 1920, when July Perry and Mose Norman approached the polls and were turned away, and a mob followed Mose Norman to the home of July Perry, and what ensued was known as the bloodiest voting day in history. A mob stormed the home of July Perry, eventually hanging him in front of the Orlando courthouse and returning to burn down the black section of Ocoee, killing some and running others out of town, never to return. This is a Florida story. This story is a part of Florida history, and as citizens, we own this story. Whether you are a descendant of Ocoee, a resident of Orange County, or a citizen of the state of Florida, this history belongs to us. It is our responsibility to tell the story and demonstrate what we have learned from it. A historical marker now stands in front of the Orange County Regional History Center, reminding us of that horrific day. Isabel Wilkerson, in her book Cast, compares our inherited history to an old house that we moved into. We may not be responsible for the condition it is in. However, the house now belongs to us, and it is up to us to fix it. Martin Luther King says, voting is the foundation stone for political action, and Fannie Lou Hamer says, nobody is free until everybody is free. Let us now open the mic for questions from League members to our panelists.
Please come on up. I know you all have questions. It's a pretty great program.
Great.
Yes, Lisa. This is Lisa Atkins, our webmaster.
Not a master at the website, no. So with today's TikTok generation, how is that affecting the movement of, of acquiring knowledge about Black history? But it seems like it's being diffused into all different kinds of history now. I mean, when I came up, the only exposure I had as a kid in Eastern Kentucky was roots. That was my very first exposure. And now, with the social media generation, there's so much happening, it almost seems like movements get diffused. Just thoughts on that?
Well, I think it might not be as bad as it appears, because I have been teaching I've been teaching law school for 25 years, but I've been teaching here in Florida. And I remember in my con law class, maybe 15 years ago, I asked them, who's Emmett Till? And some of them thought he was in Boys to Men. And I had to, so I had to explain to them, no. I asked this last week to my con law class. My con law class is probably 1/3 white, 1/3-ish black, and then 1/3 other. Everybody in that room raised their hand. Everybody in that room knew who Emmett Till was. And they knew because of social media. They knew because of TikTok. They knew because they talked to each other in their own language. So it's not as bad as it seems. They may seem diffused and disjointed, and we may not understand what they're doing, but they voted this election. Those TikTok folks did.
Good point.
Karen Ramberg, League member, both of you are teachers, professors. How are these new laws affecting how you teach your classes?
Take a first stab at that. I only have one gear. That's straight, and I got one direction. That's straight ahead. I've been on my hobby horse long before there was a thing called African American studies, or even Africana studies. It's just the direction I took in life. It's not what I do, it's who I am. So I can't deviate from that. And yes, so that's how it is.
And the course that I have to leave here and run to is called First Amendment. So I'm pretty clear on telling them that I deal in facts. I deal in facts, I deal in the law, but I do have opinions. And when I have an opinion to express, I will very clearly say to you, this is my opinion. And I will also say to you, you are welcomed and encouraged to challenge me and to give me your opinion too. And I have to admit, I never once in probably 14 or 15 years thought of anything would come out of my mouth. I'm very, very circumspect now, and I think about a minute. I still say it, but I think about what I'm going to say because someone's listening. And in addition to a lot of the rules, I don't know if you know that students are free to tape us. They can tape what we say and what we do in class and do with it whatever they want to. I think I'm real fortunate because I'm a full professor and I have tenure. And I say, okay, come for me.
Thank you. My name's Georgiana Holmes. I'm a League member. I'm also on the board, so I just want to say thank you to everyone who's coming today. This is always my favorite luncheon to attend. The question that I had actually was about the direction that's being taken in the classroom, but just to kind of piggyback on that, we see a systemic and strategic effort at the governor's mansion to be able to erase history. And you spoke to it a little bit, the power of the victor to write the story of the oppressed. And so what is the danger for folks to write this off as foolishness, as an attempt to grab the White House, an attempt to energize a base, all of that? What is the number one danger that you see, given your perspective, expertise is, in us not being concerted and just as strategic in our Black resistance?
Complacency. Complacency. In thinking about addressing this audience, it came to mind the entire expanse of the history of this country. And the history tells us that when progress is made toward righting the initial wrong around race, there's always a pushback, which energizes more folks who are not complacent, and they move one step further. And then there's another one, and another one. So all I say is, the future looks extremely bright when you have folks like this coming out of their mouths like we see here in Florida. It looks really bright because it's going to awaken folks, more folks, and we'll get more done moving forward. I'm completely confident of that. Thank you.
And let me add to that. So we have had to create this thing called African American history just to be heard. But let's be clear, this is American history. I did the 23andMe where you trace the ancestors, right? So I get a notice that I got some new ancestors. And none of them look like me. So I write them back. I say, hey, cousin. That you, Uncle Ed? never hear back from us. Never. And it's a shame because it's our history. Some of you sitting in this room don't know y'all got an Uncle Jab somewhere. You don't get to look like me. You don't get to be this shade and be straight from the son of Ghana, right? So somebody interloped somewhere. It's us. And we are in denial when we try to, because we don't want to shame each other. Shame sometimes makes you better, right? Shame makes you want to do right. So nobody tells the story of slavery. Nobody tells the story of black women being raped and mistreated to shame anybody. We tell it so that it never happens again to anyone.
Amen. I'm afraid that we're going to have to close the Q&A, but we must give a hand to our outstanding panelists. This has been wonderful, wonderful. Yes, thank you very much. Well, as we close, it wouldn't be Valeda if she didn't end with a poem. So, in closing, the poetry of Black resistance. Art, archive, attitude, augment, argue, attempt, birth, burn, battle, bleed, blend, curse, construct, create, dance, die, duck, educate, endure, fight, fix, fragment, flee, grapple, gamble, gag, hide, humble, holler, hang, invent, ignite, join, kindle, learn, move, march, mix, minister, mourn, nurture, organize, publish, play, preach, pass, protest, question, read, risk, run, release, revive, support, speak out, sit in, strike, suffer, submit, serve, sing, succeed, transform, unveil, vote, volunteer, validate, write, yell, love, pray, persist. Black people are compelled to resist. Thank you. Thank you to our distinguished guests. A hand for our distinguished guests. Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Well, that was an absolutely amazing panel. Thank you, Valeda and ASAHL, as well as our panelists for engaging us in discussion today. And I would be remiss if I did not take a moment again to acknowledge Dr. Carmen Diaz, who is not yet tenured at Valencia College. We see the echoes of voting and lack of voting reverberating in our educational system. So in this woke environment, we know why there's an empty seat. And to an amazing panel discussion of our shared history, know that this work does not stop here. This is a call to everyone to join in the fight for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Get out the vote and study the history of Black Americans' response to establish safe spaces where Black life can be sustained, fortified, and respected. Further information about Black resistance and the call to action can be found at www.asalah.org. And I want to back up a bit because I realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Tiffany Hughes, a League of Women Voter Orange County member, as well as past president of the Orange County branch NAACP. And with that, please mark your calendars while this hot topic discussion is almost over. Our next one is in the works: 1,000 disrespectful cuts. The state of public education in Florida. We will be discussing the current state of public education in Florida and what we can do to help save it. The hot topic next month will be on Thursday, March 9th. It will be on Thursday instead of Wednesday to free up the date for our members to attend Lobby Day in Tallahassee, March 7th and 8th. We also have a few announcements. Please sign the petition, Right to Clean Water. You can see Kay at the desk, my right, your left. President of League of Women Voters Florida, Cecile Schoon, will be discussing virtually the legacy of our racial history on February 20th at 6:30 p.m. Register at www.lwvfl, or League of Women Voters Florida.org. Harvard Civic Project case study on James Madison will be held on Wednesday, February 22nd at 6 p.m. at Lake Nona High School. And new members orientation and Spring League Showcase will be Tuesday, April 4th at 6 p.m. And finally, our annual membership meeting will be held on April 20th at 6 p.m. at Azalea Lodge and Mead Garden. I think we all can agree that the food this afternoon was absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much to Cuisinaires for a lovely lunch today. If you are a guest today, please join the League. The QR code on this slide are active links. Click it with your phone. Please join the League, get activated and engaged. And if there are no more announcements, then we are adjourned. Thank you.